Hello, fabulous friends and fans. Welcome to this frequently asked question video. And I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. This question comes from Solar Moon. Solar Moon has been a friend and fan for a really long time. I want to send a burst of gratitude to you. Thank you so much to all of you out there. A lot of you out there has been following me for a long time now. So whether this is your first time meeting me, welcome. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. Or you are one of the originals, like Solar Moon, who's been watching me for years and sending positive energy my way for so long. I'm really grateful to all of you out there. And of course, I did want to give a shout out to Solar Moon. And her question is really, really great. It's a great question. In one of the videos I did recently, I talked about midlife transits, how we have certain celestial events that take place for all of us right around the same time that move us into a different phase of our life. So there are certain transits that happen in early life, right? And then the really big transit that a lot of people talk about is the Saturn return. Okay, so the Saturn return ushers us into adulthood. And that happens, you start feeling it around 27 and a half, and usually at 30, you know it's over. So it takes that span of time for the universe to usher us into adulthood. It is, astrologically speaking, when we leave youth behind and enter this different phase of our life. But then it isn't just about Saturn coming back, right? There are several other things that take place, especially as we move into the mid-30s, right up until about the mid-40s, that usher us into midlife, a whole other phase of life. And this phase asks different questions at different times. So let's start with the first one. And the first one happens in the mid-30s. So normally right around 36, we have what is called the Saturn square. So this is when transiting Saturn makes an aspect to itself. And your natal Saturn is in your chart, right? Transiting Saturn moves on. You've had your Saturn return, and a few years later, Saturn, having moved on, will speak to that natal Saturn. So that's your Saturn square. And this tends to be a time of a lot of work, a lot of dedication. Sometimes it feels like the rewards or the types of rewards that you would like are not as easy to grasp, but this is where the universe asks you to put in the time, really, to dedicate yourself to where it is that you desire to experience solid gains. But it's not just on a professional level, it's on a personal level as well. This is where we start to get more honest with ourselves about what's working in our life, but more importantly, what isn't. Now, it's really important to listen to what is taking place in our life right about now, because if we honor it, right, if we honor where it is that the universe or where it is that we are feeling within ourselves, you know what, this isn't working. I need more structure. I need more dedication, or just I need to be happy and I need to take ownership for that happiness. If we can honor that, then the subsequent transits, the subsequent celestial events that take place will go a whole lot easier than if we don't, because sometimes people don't, right? They don't want to listen. They just push it down, and then they get to the final of this series of midlife transits, and that's when, you know, big changes start happening. So we'll get to it in a moment. But this is the first. So this is the first check-in with yourself, the first reality check with yourself. And lots of different things can happen at this time. Sometimes people really find their groove with their career and they realize this is what they really want to do. Sometimes it's usually right at the Saturn return that we sort of figure out who we are, where we want to give our time. And this is where we really dedicate ourselves to that. If it isn't career, then it is about being honest, as I said, about your happiness. So if you're working and you're dedicated to a career, this is about you saying, okay, wait, this isn't what I want. This isn't the life that I wanted. So what is it that you do want? Is it a whole other career? Is it to go in a different direction? Is it to have a family? Is it to travel, right? It's about getting honest. That's what Saturn does. And mainly it gets you honest about what you need to be happy and to be willing to sacrifice for what you need to be happy. So that's what the Saturn square asks us. It's the first of the midlife transits, an incredibly important time. It can feel like we're putting a lot of effort in without a lot of gain sometimes, all else being equal, depending on how that Saturn is speaking in your chart. But for all that, this can be a time when we really do the work to reap the gains just a little bit further down the road. What also happens as we move along and we move further into our 30s is we have our Pluto square. So right about now, those people in their late 30s and recently, like people who are born, who are like in their late 30s now, or maybe, you know, if you think about people who are maybe 5 years older, they in their late 30s as well experienced the Pluto square right around this time. And so late 30s, what happens is the Pluto square takes place, the later 30s, I should say, so 37, 38 for the current generation, 37, 38. This can be major change, major upheaval. This is where everything has to change, especially in that particular area of life, and especially where it comes to knowing where it is that we've put up with a half life or what is ultimately superfluous. So Pluto wants us to be honest with ourselves. Pluto wants us to be real with ourselves. And Pluto really does not like the superficial. Pluto says, okay, are you going to continue playing power games, right? Are you going to let yourself get into these power struggles? Or are you going to transform that energy and elevate that energy? So wherever Pluto is in your chart, everybody, everyone, wherever Pluto is in your chart, you reach a time in your life, you reach a moment in your life where you decide. You say to yourself, okay, am I going to continue the pattern or am I going to elevate? And normally wherever Pluto is in a chart, it tends to be that at an early age, again, all else being equal, depending on how that Pluto is speaking in a chart, usually at an early age, we've seen the dark side of how that energy of that sign, and especially the house that Pluto is in our chart, how that can manifest, the dark side that can manifest. So for example, a lot of people out there who are in their 30s now, in their 40s, are born with Pluto in the sign of Libra. So these are the people who were born right around the 70s in particular. The 70s would have felt this in particular, early 80s. So these are the people who were the first kids of when divorce became a lot more accessible. So Pluto in the sign of Libra showed us some of how dark relationships can get, which is part of love, right? A part of love and light is knowing that it can go in different ways. That light sometimes you get to at the end of the tunnel. And so these are people generally who were raised when divorce started getting a lot more accessible, and people, especially kids, started to experience the effects of that. More kids were latchkey kids. More kids were the kids of divorce at a very young age. So they grew up with this understanding that, you know, relationships can be tough. They can be painful. They can end. People can change dramatically so. And this is also the generation that we're now seeing that is getting married later than ever. They're having children later than ever because they're understanding love differently. They sort of have to step into a self-understanding where they've transformed that energy, and that takes time. So that's why I do think a big part of the move has been getting married later. We see this, you know, especially across the Western world. We see people getting married later and later. We see people starting families later and later. It's really this this Libra energy, this Pluto and Libra energy that is speaking in their charts. So you have your Pluto square, and it says to you, how are you doing with that transformation? How are you doing with that elevation of that energy? Do you like where you are in love in particular, but particularly also what we tend to see happen is a shakeup in wherever that natal Pluto is in. So if you have Pluto in the first house, your appearance is probably going to go through some changes, like dramatically so, where you say, you know what, I'm sick of what I don't like about my appearance. I'm sick of feeling a certain way. I want to feel strong. I want to look the way I want to look. And you sort of dedicate yourself to that. You put in the work and you make those changes, brave changes in some cases. If you have Pluto in the 7th house, this is where you get serious about healing any relationship issues so that you evolve that energy and move towards relationships that are transformative experiences, where they become about being mutually respectful and honest with each other and not taking ownership for the other person's stuff. And also, you not expecting someone to heal you, becomes part of that process. So depending on where Pluto is in your chart, you'll experience a certain sense of upheaval, but especially right about now, if you're having your Pluto square, this Pluto will ask you to look at love and ask you to elevate, evolve, transform what you've known about love so that you make yourself available to greater love. Then we have the Saturn trine, okay? So Saturn trine happens at the very end of the 30s in general. So at the very end of the 30s, we have the Saturn trine. This is where the work that we did during the Saturn square pays off. So this happens about 3 years after the Saturn square. This is where the payoff comes. This is where, if we used that Saturn square well, if we dedicated ourselves, if we put in the time, this is where the rewards start to come. This is where we find our flow, we find our groove. And this is where we start to really establish ourselves as the person who knows what they're doing. You're the person in the room who has the answers because you've been doing what you do, whether it is on a work level, which tends to be the case with Saturn. Saturn is about sort of achievement, but it can be on personal levels as well. So if you were one of those people who realized, you know what, I'm sick of this career game, I want to have a family, I want to go in that direction, this is where you start to feel like you have what you want. You found your groove. Generally speaking, you tend to find your groove more and more as a parent. If you realize during, the Saturn trine comes and you go, you know what, I really don't want to have kids. You kind of accept that, or the Saturn square happens and you sort of face that, because usually right around that time, especially if you're a woman, you're sort of looking at your own fertility generally. And so this is where you sort of start to find your groove. And then if you do want that, you own that much more and you pursue that with that much more dedication. So wherever Saturn is in your chart is going to speak volumes to how you experience this energy. So again, if you've got Saturn in the first house, this is where you start to have a deeper acceptance of self. Your self-criticism calms down. You feel good about the way that you look even more, generally speaking. And if you have Saturn, again, to use the example, 7th house Saturn, this is where relationship, love stuff, you sort of see the wisdom of what has been, and you see how it is that what has been has prepared you to experience greater love now and to take ownership for your own stuff in regards to love. So this is where the payoff starts to come. And then we move you forward, and the next major midlife transit that takes place is the Neptune square. So then the Neptune square takes place. And the Neptune square tends to happen in the early 40s. For those people in their early 40s right about now, they'd be experiencing this. So for those in their early 40s, having the Neptune square can be a time of, saying to yourself, okay, where has life lived up to the promise and where has it not? Where is it that the reality is better than anything you could have been promised? And where is it that you're now ready to accept where you are right now in your life and what it is more that you desire to do? So sort of finding your peace with what's worked and what hasn't. And also, more than that, to me, this is about really grounding your faith in whatever. Faith in yourself, faith in life. This is where you get really clear or clearer. It is Neptune after all. Neptune's not a clear energy, okay? So for some people, in all honesty, this can be a time that feels that things should be better than they are. Sometimes people, they do experience a little bit of a slump and they go, wait a minute, I was feeling so strong back in the day with Saturn trine. Why am I not feeling that right now? Well, ultimately, this is about you wading through whatever it is that has been disappointing or wherever it is that you've been holding on to an illusion and deciding that you are going to choose reality. So if there have been any escapist tendencies in any way, this is where the universe is going to say, look, check in with this. Look at this. Is escaping still working for you? So ultimately, this is good. As my dear friend and fellow astrologer Michael Barwick says, when faith is healthy, it questions itself. When faith is healthy, it questions itself. And this is that chance to do that questioning. Now, if you really are not willing to do that questioning, then this can be a time when you really tap into a more fervent energy. And that could end up taking you on a pathway of just tiring yourself out. And so I also think of this as a time when you realize what matters and what doesn't, what's worth giving your energy to, what's worth having faith in, and what isn't. And so grounding yourself, And look, Saturn is grounding. Neptune, again, not very grounding. But ultimately what this says is that you don't want to live in a dream. Are you okay with what has been a dream? Are you okay with the reality or not? So this gives you a chance to look at that and gives you a chance to take a dream and maybe even transform it so that it can fit into where you are right now in your life. It is a reality check as well, but it's a reality check that we can decide, as with all the transits, right? You have a huge amount of choice. You can decide what you're going to do with any given transit. But it's Neptune. Again, I want to say that. And it's really important. Neptune is also compassion. It's really important to realize, to be compassionate, not only towards others, but towards yourself. This also, to me, speaks to taking care of your spirit. Like, what is it that drains you of energy? What drains your spirit? And I recently had this lesson, actually, because right now, as I'm posting this, we collectively are experiencing, and in our own charts as well, we are experiencing Saturn square Neptune. So this is a collective transit that's taking place at the moment, Saturn square Neptune. And this transit for all of us is asking us to look beyond our own sort of beliefs, look beyond wanting to, state and claim a certain political stance, or saying like us versus them. I like to use the example of a book of essays called Strangers to Ourselves by Julia Kristeva. And this is what this transit to me, this is what collectively we're learning, is that all the stuff that we project onto others, really it's us, it's part of us. And I think the fact that right now, as this transit is going on, we're having election season as well in the US, which is world news really. But I think this is showing us something about this as well. Like, where is it that we're going to give into our fear? And how is it that certain situations manifest? And where is it that we can see ourselves in others? And where it is that we're refusing to, right? And so to me, I also think about how this is about where we're wasting energy. Where we're draining our spirit, where it is that we need to protect ourselves on a spiritual level, intuitive level, on a level of our sensitivity, to honor that, to recognize that, and know what we need. And for everyone, it's different. So for some people, they realize that they've been way too protective, and they're ready to let that go, and they're ready to go out there, right? They leave behind fears. They question all those things that they thought were so real, that they were the center of the universe, and that frees them to do more of what they want to do. For other people, they realize more of what they don't want to do, which tends to be more dominant with the Neptune square. What is draining to your spirit? What is draining you emotionally? Where is it that you're just pouring and pouring and not feeling like you're getting a return? Or where is it that a project, an avenue, a person, a situation is asking for too much? Or is asking for so much that then you don't have the energy you need to give to what really matters to you. So it's about being wiser with your own energy, with your own spiritual energy. It's about being wiser with your emotions as well, and also realizing what's yours and what's not. Again, you're not the center of the universe, really. And it's always amazing to me, people taking things so personally and stuff. And this is something that I think you really start to understand with the Saturn trine. It really hits home. And Neptune squares to make sure that it hit home, make sure that you get it, that ultimately people do all kinds of things that have nothing to do with you. And a lot of times we think everybody's looking at us, all this stuff is happening to us, and the truth is it's about us and our own journey, and people are thinking about themselves. The next transit, probably the biggest one, I think, of all the midlife transits, is the Uranus opposition. The Uranus opposition. Now, this is one that has been written about extensively, particularly in a book called Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. Now, Richard Tarnas, he's one of the people I interviewed way back in the day when I was doing the first episodes of my online show, Synchronicity WebTV. And he sat down with me for a really long time. We did this extensive interview, and his book, Cosmos and Psyche, is amazing, is just really this wonderful articulation and documentation of the breakthroughs that people have at that time. So here's the thing with the Uranus opposition, which I really think is kind of the cherry on top of the midlife transits, is that this experience, this Uranus opposition happens, and if you've been using the earlier transits well, this can be an amazing time of breakthroughs, of progress, where everything you've worked for now just, hits the spinning wheel and you're just propelling into your future. So this can be a time when people who've been really dedicating to establishing an expertise, like you'll see people who've been teaching or writing for a long time, this is when they'll get a really big book deal. You'll see a lot of actors and singers. This is where they have their big breakthroughs. This is where they establish themselves and get the really big awards, the legend awards, the icon awards. And this is where sort of the best of people comes forward. And this is if you've been using those first transits well. If you haven't, and if you've been pushing it down, not wanting to look at it, pushing it down, then this is where, you break out the toupee, you get the sports car out of nowhere, you want to break off from everything that's been and go in a whole other way. Now that happens, again, if you haven't been listening. It doesn't have to be that way. If you want it to be that way, that's awesome, right? And even if you've been honoring the previous transits, if you feel like you want to go off and do what you need to do, then of course, honor your calling, of course, I'm going to say. But having said that, it's always easier if you honor yourself as soon as you know to. As soon as you know you can do that, and it'd be surprising, a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't give themselves that permission. This becomes that point where it's like, okay, it's all or nothing. Either I'm going my own way or I'm not. And so this tends to be a time of, again, with the Pluto square, there's some upheaval. Again, this can be like sort of that breakthrough or breakout happening. If you've been using this time wisely, or rather the years building up to this, the transits building up to this wisely, this is a time when you're breaking out in new directions and having all kinds of wonderful things, wonderful experiences, attention, progress happen for you. If you have not been, then this is a time when you say enough is enough, I gotta be me. And you go your own way, you do your own thing. This to me, I think, is like the standout. When I'm doing a personalized horoscope, for example, when I'm doing a reading and I see that this person is coming up to their Uranus opposition, and if they tell me, or I can see that they've been working very diligently, right? You can usually tell by the transits that have been leading up to, especially their personal transits. Any outer planets transiting their personal planets will tell you volumes about what this person has been going through, what's brought them to this point. But normally you can tell if this is going to be something where this person needs to go in a whole other way, or is this person going to be one of those people who's going to have this breakthrough and progress and feel like things really start, as I said, hitting that spinning wheel, where things start hitting a flow and big things start happening. They start reaching the masses, the proverbial masses, right? Whatever the masses might be for them, they start reaching those masses to get good things happening for them. Also, this can be a time, if you aren't really like career minded, but you have to have a job, this can be a time when you do get a good job, or you get a job where you feel like, yeah, this is where I could be for a while now. This can also be some really great assignments, depending on what kind of work you do. This can also be the time when, because there's this surprise element, this tends to be a time like sort of the last, like people, if they want to have children, they're in their early 40s. This is where they'll reach out for medical help, or medical assistance. And this is when the chances of that working, all else being equal, depending on what else is happening in your chart, but all else being equal, this tends to represent really good results with big changes like that. Having good results that come out of nowhere, experimental treatments, bringing huge gains can happen at this time. But again, if that's your situation, you might want to have an astrologer look specifically at your chart to give you some information that is unique for you to help you fine tune that plan forward. And then finally, we have the Saturn opposition. The Saturn opposition take place. For some generations, the Saturn opposition will come after the Uranus opposition. For others, like right about now, people who are having their Uranus opposition are also having, in some cases, but are also having their Saturn opposition as well. So I've been seeing this in charts lately, where people simultaneously going through that Uranus opposition and that Saturn opposition, they'll be very close together, or the Saturn opposition will be taking place just before the Uranus, which is, because the thing is, the planets, they don't move like perfectly around the sun, right? The solar system. They don't move perfectly around the sun exactly in the same years. So, for example, Uranus will take 82 to, up to 86 years to move around the sun. And the reason is because every cycle of the planets is actually part of a larger cycle, a much larger cycle. And the planets will actually make these, geometric mandalas in the sky over a period of many years as they move around the sun in different patterns with slight changes as part of their cycle. So they have these smaller cycles where they move once around the sun as part of larger cycles that take many, many years, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries to complete. So for the generation now, they're having this opposition. These two happen at the same time simultaneously. The Saturn opposition is the reality check, right? This is sort of the last of the major transits into midlife. This is what firmly plants you into midlife. And this is Saturn, reality check, acceptance, looking at where you are, where it is now that you're, really the boss of you, where you're ready to be more the boss of you. All of that starts to come into play with the Saturn opposition. So whereas the Uranus opposition can be about the breakthroughs, the Saturn opposition says you still got to put in the work. You still got to put in the time if you really want to make the most of the gains that Uranus brought you. If you want to make sure that those gains last, now's the time to really dedicate yourself to take ownership for the results you want, the success you want, and put in the time. Saturn is about time. Saturn is about being realistic. Saturn is about setting the structures up so that you are putting in consistent effort. But also, Saturn is happiness. So this is where, if you've had those breakthroughs, that's awesome. But this is where you have that, moment that says, okay, am I really happy now? Where is it that I can accept? Where is it that I can be at peace? Where is it that now I'm ready to finally make those changes? And sometimes the changes are just within you. It's about acceptance. Acceptance is a very powerful way to make powerful changes in your life. And sometimes, as is the case with Saturn, and as is the case with Pluto as well, the only power you have is surrender, is acceptance. Sometimes, if you're going through a tough Pluto transit, a tough Saturn transit, that tends to be part of the lesson, acceptance and surrender. There are other times and other transits that are all about you owning your power, making things happen, making waves, right? That's awesome. But then Uranus comes along and shows you that sometimes the best things can seem to come out of nowhere and put you on a path where you really feel like you can truly be yourself. That's part of what Uranus represents, you being you. You moving into that, to borrow Jeff Green's word, moving into that understanding of who you've been created to be rather than who you've been conditioned to be. So as you move in that direction, Saturn asks you, are you sure you're on that path? Are you honoring that path of who you know yourself to be? And if you are, then this can be a time when you ensure you continue to do so for possibly the rest of your life. So those are the midlife transits. And thank you so much to everybody out there for watching. Thank you, Solar Moon, for your questions. And I love your questions. Please do keep them coming. Facebook, Twitter, Google+, my website, nadiyashah.com, and the YouTube comments as well. Truly so grateful for this moment with you. Until we connect again, take care. Visit Amazon.com to learn about my book, Astrology, realized in English and Spanish, and shop my website, nadiyashah.com, for exclusive The Universe is Wise and Loving merchandise and my signature jewelry line, Astro Fabulous Jewelry. Enjoy.